everyone. In preparing for the unit test on Friday, I wanted to go over the social structure of ancient Greece and how the social structure affected Greek civilization. So there's a couple things that we need to know about the social structure or how the pyramid worked. One is that it wasn't the same in every single city-state, but it was very similar. So a city-state in ancient Greece was called a polis. That's this word right here, polis. It is Greek for a city-state. So that means that it is made up of the city or the urban area and the farmland or the rural area all around it. So those two things make up one political unit, and that is known as a polis. So it is both the city and the farmland. So that's what a city-state is, the urban area and the rural area, and then that's one political unit. What every city-state had in common is that they all had a temple or an acropolis. So the acropolis was a major temple, the main temple in the city, where most people went to pray to their patron god. The most famous of these temples is known as the Acropolis, which is located in Athens. The Acropolis started out actually as a fort. So when the city of Athens was a very small city, so not very many people lived there, everyone fit within the city walls. And so if you look at this picture here, you can see the original city walls. So at one point in time, the whole city was just up at the top of the hill. We know that mountains are very good for defense and hills are very good for defense. It's very difficult for an army to come up a hill. It's very easy to use gravity and throw things down. So the safest place they could build their cities was on tops of hills or on the top of a mountain. And so Athens is built on the top of this hill near the sea. And the main defense was the Acropolis or this fort. And everyone lived within the city walls. As they got bigger and bigger and bigger, so as more and more people lived in Athens and the city state or the polis grew, more people lived outside of the walls than they lived inside the walls. So there were more rural areas. They needed more farmland to feed all the people who were living in the city itself. And over time, this fortress became just a temple. And so this is what it looks like in 2020. They're in the process of, the people of Greece today are in the process of restoring the temple to prevent it from ruining more and to try to bring it back to what it looked like in ancient times, so about 3,000 years ago. So now, or later, after it stopped being a fortress, it became a temple. And that's something that all the city-states had in common, is that they all had some kind of temple. They all had the same religion. They all had a patron god or a goddess. So going on, continuing with the idea of what all city-states have, they all had a wall that was around the main part of the city that cut off the urban area from the rural area or where the farmland was. So they all had a city wall for defense. In the time of the Peloponnesian War, when Sparta invaded Athens or tried to, all of the farmers and everyone came into the city walls, and the Spartan army was outside the walls, preventing anyone from leaving. They did this trying to think that if they didn't have access to their farmland, the people inside the city wall would starve. However, Athens had this really great harbor and port where they were able to get food from other places, mainly the sea, to feed everyone. So inside the city-state, you can see they had the Acropolis, so they had their main temple. All the city-states had an agora. Remember, the agora is the main area where there's political conversations happening. This is where voting takes place, and this is also where you're going to buy and sell things that you want. So it's also a marketplace. So again, all city-states, they all spoke Greek. They all had the same religion. They all had an agora. They were all centered around the Acropolis. They all had a city wall for protecting them. They all had a patron god or goddess. There were some things that were different, though. Not all the city-states had the same amount of power. So Sparta and Athens were the most powerful city-states. Athens controlled the Delian League. Sparta controlled the Peloponnesian League. City-states like Corinth and Thebes were also very powerful as well. So you can see they're actually all located pretty similar. So Corinth is here, Thebes is here, here's Athens, and here's Sparta. So they're not very far apart from each other. So this is really where a lot of the power was. Um, there were other city states as well. Rhodes didn't have as much power. They were easily taken over by Sparta and their neighbors. Who didn't have the power were so who didn't have the power in ancient Greek times were women and slaves. So all the city states had slaves. The main reason how they got slaves was one city state would conquer another one. So if I go back one slide, if I can go back one slide, let's see. So if I can go back one slide, when Sparta would invade a city state, so let's say that Sparta comes over to Crete and they take over the island of Crete, the people that were here in Crete, they would be taken back to Sparta as slaves. And then if you were born, if your parents were slaves, then you were born, and then you would also be a slave. That would be your job and your role. In Sparta, you were able to work for your freedom. In Athens, you were not. So it depended on where you were as well, but that's where the slaves came from. So the powerful city states were Sparta and Athens. The powerful people in those city states were men. So men had the most power, especially if they were free men or considered citizens. So they were not slaves. They were not immigrants. They did not come from another city state and say, hey, I want to live here now. But they were born in that city state and their parents were born in that city state, specifically their father. They had the most power. So again, that left women not having power and slaves did not have any power as well. To be a citizen, you need to be male, over the age of 18, born in that city state, and your father had to be born in that city state. Since Athens is the city state that used democracy the most and started it, we usually refer to the requirements of being a citizen as being born in Athens and your father born in Athens. But it was really any city state that practiced democracy had the same rules. So what this would mean is that if your dad moved into Athens, like say he lived in Sparta and decided, I don't want to live in Sparta anymore, I want to move to Athens, he would move to Athens. He would not be considered a citizen. If you were born, your father, you are also not a citizen because your father was not born in Athens. He was born in Sparta. So you grow up, you get married, you have a son, your son now gets to be a citizen. So there was a way for families to become citizens in Athens. So it started out that your grandpa moved in, your grandpa and your dad are not citizens, but when you turn 18, if you're a boy, then you get to be a citizen. And then that means that you have responsibilities, the most important of which is participating in the government, specifically voting. This also means that women could never be citizens, and it also means that slaves could never be citizens. So being a citizen means that you have to vote. The way that democracies decided if a law would pass or not is something called majority rule. Majority rule means that 51% of the people or 51% of the votes decide, yes, we want that law to pass. Or majority rule means that 51% of the votes means no, we don't want the vote or the law to pass. Majority rule is how we use and make decisions in the United States in our government today in 2020. So when lawmakers vote on something, if 51% of them say yes, the law passes. If 51% of them say no, the law fails. If you veto, remember veto means no, that means that the law is going to fail. So again, citizens were required to participate in the government. They would meet in the agora to vote, and if they weren't there, they could be fined money. And there was also like public shaming that would happen if you didn't come and do your responsibilities of voting. So majority rule is how they made decisions in ancient Greece, and what it means is that most people want something or don't want something. The main differences between men and women, men had all of the power and women didn't. Men had all of the rights and privileges and could own businesses and could go to school, and women could not do any of those things. Men could participate in the government, women could not. It was not a good time to be a woman in ancient Greek times, especially in Athens. You would think that Athens that wanted to spend or was very much into thinking about how rights affect people and where the birthplace of philosophy came from and science came from, and there was a lot of focus on education. You would think that their women would have more rights, but they did not. We'll talk more about that more in another video when I talk specifically about the differences between Sparta and Athens. But right now, just overall, men and women, men had power, women did not. Men could do things, women could not. That's the big differences between how men and women were treated in ancient Greece. So the social structure overall was pretty similar. They just have different names for things. But again, at this time, the gods are the most important things. So they're at the top or above the social pyramid. Then you have free men, you have citizens. Then you have the people who moved into that city state that were men. Then you have women, and then you have slaves. So underneath where I'm, my little picture right here, it says slaves underneath women for the social structure. But so they have different words for them. Like they have the word medic, or they have the word heliotes for slaves or for people who moved into Athens. So they have Greek words for them. But overall, it's just gods, citizens, other free men or other men that moved into the city, women, and slaves. That's the basic social structure of ancient Greece. Sparta had a little bit different of a government than Athens. Athens, we know, had a democracy where if you were a citizen, you participated. Sparta had an oligarchy, and so they were really ruled by two kings. They had the most power. And then they had wealthy aristocrats or landowners who advised them, along with a council of elders that advised the wealthy aristocrats. So you really have like a group of people that are making the decisions for everyone who lives in Sparta. So their government is set up just a little bit differently. So that's a little bit about the social structure of Greece and Sparta. I hope this helped going over the notes a little bit and help you figure out how to fill out the notes guide and help you review and study for the unit test. So thanks for watching and have a great day.